Hi, my name is Brooke, and I'm 34 years old. Last week, my own brother called me a threat in open court just moments after slapping me across the face. The bailiffs cuffed my wrists like I was dangerous, while my family, my father, my cousins, even the woman who once called me her daughter, just sat there, watching. Not one of them stood up. And that silence? It wasn't indifference. It was planned. I wasn't meant to be seen. For everything they'd built to survive, I had to disappear. When my brother, Marshall, said my name out loud, the whole room shifted. The air cracked like glass under pressure. Ms. Quinn, the prosecutor said, representing the CIA Oversight Division. Nobody gasped. But every eye turned. Every breath stalled. For once, nobody was looking at Marshall. They were looking at me. And I didn't confirm or deny it. I just let it sit there, quiet and uncomfortable. Truth has a way of doing that. My lips still stung where he hit me. Blood crusted along the edge of my mouth. I hadn't wiped it off. I wanted them to see. I wanted them to remember what injustice leaves behind. Marshall's jaw twitched. He glanced at the judge like the man had spoken another language. She's lying, he said. Too fast, too sharp.
She's not with them.
She's on trial for obstruction. The judge didn't even blink. That will be determined in due time. That's when the bailiffs moved in. One on each side of me. They weren't aggressive, just procedural. Routine. One reached for my wrist. The other took my bag. You're not authorized to search that, I said. Standard procedure for flagged individuals. Marshall muttered loud enough for the room to hear. He wanted to strip me bare, not with a weapon but with a label.
Threat.
Unstable. Dangerous. I tightened my fingers into fists, the cuffs pressing into my skin. They dumped my things across the table. Pens, a granola bar, and a creased photo of me at 16 standing next to my mother. It slid to the floor. The bailiff didn't pick it up. Marshall stepped on it. Not hard. Just walked over it. Casual. Deliberate. The kind of cruelty that whispers, you don't matter. Nobody said a word. The judge didn't flinch. My court-appointed lawyer muttered, Your Honor, but let it trail off into nothing. I bent down and picked up the photo myself, brushed it off, folded it, slid it back into my bag. I'd learned a long time ago how to work around restraints. People think silence is weakness, but sometimes silence is armor. When I straightened, the judge turned to me. Do you have anything to say, Miss Quinn? I scanned the courtroom. The clerk wouldn't meet my eyes. The bailiffs had returned to their posts. Marshall stared at me like he was waiting for me to break. I said, Only if you're all listening. The judge raised his brow. Proceed. I was brought here under false pretenses, I began. Framed for interfering with an investigation that didn't exist. Branded a threat because I observed, not because I acted. I turned toward Marshall. My brother lied.
He laughed. Short.
Bitter. You're really going to do this here? I'm not doing anything, Marshall, I said. I'm just not hiding anymore. He leaned forward. You know what this makes you look like? Yes, I said calmly. And you know what it makes you look like? The judge slammed his gavel once. Enough, Mr. Creed. Control yourself. Marshall didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on me, calculating. Like he'd misjudged a variable and couldn't figure out which. I sat back down. My wrists ached. My lips still burned. But I wasn't small anymore. The courtroom resumed its rhythm. Motions, shuffling papers, chairs scraping against tile. But something had changed. They didn't see me as the problem anymore. They saw me. Only if you're all listening, I had said. And now, for the first time in years, they were. The silence that followed wasn't accidental. It was dense, demanding. The judge didn't nod. He didn't lean forward. He simply said, Proceed. But I didn't not right away. Instead, I exhaled slowly, scanning the courtroom. Familiar faces and unfamiliar ones. No one moved. No one blinked. If I had been waiting for someone to rise up and protest what was unfolding, I'd be waiting forever. Marshall cleared his throat behind me, loud enough for it to sound like a threat. That badge doesn't excuse what she's done, he said, looking toward the judge. He had a way of sliding blades between words, making accusations sound like duty. The judge ignored him and gave a nod to the bailiff. Without a word, they came for my bag again. No explanation. No legal basis. Just motion disguised as protocol. One grabbed it from the table. The other stood beside me like I might detonate. "Is this really necessary?" my court-appointed lawyer asked, sounding as fired up as a cold cup of coffee. Marshall didn't even blink. "We've had reason to believe she's carrying unauthorized surveillance equipment." The bailiff started unzipping the pockets. First the front, where they found a notebook, 2 pens, and a sandwich wrapped in foil. It hit the floor with a sad plop. Nobody bent to pick it up. Next came the main compartment, papers, receipts, a USB drive still capped. And then the photo. It fluttered to the ground, resting next to Marshall's polished boot. A faded image, me and my mom, standing in front of our old porch. Eyes smiling more than our mouths. Marshall looked down at it and stepped forward. He didn't stomp. He didn't grind it in. He just walked over it. Intentional. Familiar. The kind of malice that doesn't scream. It just pretends you're not even there. I didn't flinch. Didn't speak. I bent over, slow and precise, and picked it up myself. The cuffs made it hard, but not impossible. I brushed the corner clean with my sleeve, folded it gently, and placed it back in my bag. The room remained still. Not frozen in fear, just indifferent. And that, I think, was worse. I looked toward the gallery, to the back right corner. Lurin was there. He hadn't moved. He hadn't looked surprised. Just sat there like a man watching a tragedy he already knew by heart. His eyes locked on mine, not with pity, but memory. He used to say, "Silence is strength." I used to believe him. Marshall leaned toward the bailiff. "Anything else?" "Nope," the man replied. My attorney tried again. "Judge, this search wasn't warranted. And she's still cuffed." "She assaulted a fellow officer." Marshall snapped quickly. "No," I said, my voice flat but firm. "I didn't assault anyone. I filmed you pushing an elderly man to the ground. That's why I'm here." A few people shifted in their seats. Heads tilted. Marshall's face didn't move. But his mouth didn't open either. That told me everything. He hadn't expected me to say it out loud. He hadn't expected me to speak at all. The judge finally sighed and turned toward me. "You may remain seated. This court will now hear statements from Officer Creed." "Of course," Marshall said, slipping right back into his polished tone. He turned toward the bench. "We have reason to believe Miss Quinn." I tuned him out. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew the script. I'd heard it my whole life. Every family dinner I wasn't invited to. Every graduation photo I was cropped out of. Every "you're too sensitive," every "don't make this about you." This wasn't about one slap. This was about years of being erased. The sandwich still lay on the floor. That absurd detail felt like a symbol. I reached down, picked it up, and placed it back in my bag. It meant something. It meant I still had control over what stayed with me. The judge glanced at me. "Ms. Quinn, do you wish to provide your side?" I looked at Marshall. At the seat where my family should have sat. At the ghost of what once was pride. "Yes," I said. Because sometimes the only way to break silence is to fill it with the truth. Lurin blinked once. Slowly. Like he remembered too. The manila folder in his lap wasn't just paper. It held something heavier, something we both knew didn't belong buried anymore. I let my wrists rest in the cuffs, the edges already starting to leave faint impressions on my skin. I didn't look at Marshall. Not yet. If I did, I might say too much. And right now, silence was sharper than any accusation. The judge cleared his throat. "Officer Creed, please proceed with your account." Marshall didn't miss a beat. "Your Honor, the defendant, Ms. Quinn, interfered with an ongoing investigation, refused to comply with direct orders, and recorded classified material at a restricted site. Her behavior was erratic and escalated in a calculated, deliberate pattern." He said it the way only a seasoned liar can, smooth, measured, certain. I closed my eyes just for a second. I was 22 again, sitting outside a federal building in Raleigh after the second interview for a joint intelligence unit. Cross-departmental, high-level, far from the quiet admin job I held at the time. They said I was a standout candidate.
Sharp.
Invisible in plain sight. When the acceptance letter arrived, I opened it alone on the porch of my parents' old house. My mother was inside, stirring soup with one hand, holding the phone with the other. I read the words twice before I could breathe again. That offer, it meant escape, validation, a path forward. I told Marshall a week later. He nodded, barely looked up. Those programs chew people up, he said. Then, like a good older brother, offered to help me prep for the background check. Said he had experience. 2 months later, I got the call. I'd been disqualified. A flagged family incident. No one explained. No one returned my calls. I didn't fight it. I folded into myself and went back to my desk job. Years passed, until one night, a friend from the program texted me out of nowhere. Hey, strange question, but why didn't you ever show? Your brother spoke so highly of you. Didn't realize you two were so close. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. A month after that, I found the certificate in a drawer at my parents' house, beneath expired coupons and church newsletters. It had my name scratched out in pen. Marshall's name was typed over it. He didn't just steal the opportunity.
He stole me.
The version of me that might have been undeniable. The one who would have been more than just tolerated. I confronted my mother. Showed her the certificate. She looked at it for a long moment, then quietly said, he did what he had to do for his future. We never talked about it again. She never asked why I moved out. Back in the courtroom, Marshall was still talking. Still narrating his fiction with that clipped, composed tone. He always had that voice. The kind that made lies sound like instructions. I adjusted the sleeve of my blouse slightly. The watch underneath it pulsed once, a soft, familiar rhythm against my skin. A reminder. A tether. Marshall was explaining my so-called pattern of escalation. I almost smiled. The irony was rich. He didn't even know how right he was. I let my eyes drift to Lurin again. He hadn't opened the folder. He didn't need to. His thumb was tapping the edge of it, slow, deliberate, rhythmic. The way he used to knock on my door at dinnertime back when we all still lived under one roof. It grounded me. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt precise. Marshall finished. The judge made a note. My lawyer shifted beside me, finally sensing the shift in air. That's when I realized something. This wasn't about proving Marshall wrong. It was about reclaiming the part of my story I'd let him author for far too long. Lurin's lips parted like he wanted to speak, but he didn't. He placed his hand flat on the folder, anchoring it like it weighed more than paper ever should. I didn't move either. Our conversation had already happened, wordless, but sharp. Then my watch buzzed twice. I glanced down subtly, rotating my wrist beneath the table. The secured app opened silently beneath the calorie tracker decoy. The screen lit up. A thread of screenshots.
Group chats.
Timestamps from last week. Names I knew by heart. Marshall. Aunt Cheryl. Cousin Mina. Even Lorraine, the one who once braided my hair and called me her favorite. My name was everywhere. Not with sympathy. Not with doubt. But with contempt. Always playing the victim. She's probably taping this right now. Can't fix broken. That last one was from Lorraine. I didn't let the burn rise to my face. But something inside me settled. Not shattered, settled. They weren't misled. They were united. And they'd been practicing this silence for years. I let the screen dim, then rotated the bezel of my watch, 3 turns counterclockwise. The signal activated beneath the surface. It was silent. But it was everything we had prepared for. Peyton Quinn. Liability. Peyton Quinn. Overreacting. Peyton Quinn. Listening. I didn't look at Marshall.
Not yet.
I didn't need to. He was still riding the momentum of his own voice, delivering his carefully crafted narrative to the judge as if preaching a sermon. But my lawyer leaned in, voice barely a whisper. You've got a secure call. Should I decline? I shook my head. He slid the earpiece under the table. I slipped it in behind my hairline, keeping my posture neutral. A second later, the voice came through. It wasn't familiar, but the tone was unmistakable, controlled, clipped, rehearsed. "You should be careful what you do next," the man said. Flat.
Male.
Not aggressive. Almost pitying. "Who is this?" I asked quietly. "You've stirred things that don't like being seen," he replied. "He's not alone. And you know that." "And you're warning me out of concern?" I said evenly. "No," he answered. "Out of pity. You're alone in that room. And they're going to bury you." He hung up. The line cut to static. Then silence. For a moment, I stared through the courtroom into nothing. And suddenly I wasn't 34 years old in federal court. I was 13 again, at my cousin's birthday party. Everyone wore matching t-shirts. A glittery pink banner read "Happy Family." My name wasn't on the cake. I wasn't in the group text. I sat at the far end of the table, shorter chair, paper plate on my lap, plastic fork, and a juice cup that spilled without anyone offering a napkin.
They didn't forget me.
They excluded me. Intentionally. That memory had never left me. It had only grown quieter under louder ones. Until now. Back in the courtroom, Marshall was still talking about patterns of behavior. Of course he was. He always needed a narrative to be the hero in. The judge appeared to listen, his expression passive. But the air had shifted. Everyone in that room felt it, whether they acknowledged it or not. Then Lurin moved. He uncrossed his legs, sat up straighter, placed the folder gently on his lap, and tapped his finger twice on the seal. I straightened slightly in response. Wrists stiff in the cuffs. Head tilted. Not asking. Just watching. This was the moment they hadn't prepared for. Not the evidence. Not the accusation. But the stillness between my choices. The space where rage becomes strategy. I glanced down again. The green light on my watch was still glowing. Transmission in progress. Good. I adjusted my seat. Leaned slightly toward Riley, our quiet observer, and whispered, "It's time."
He didn't speak.
Just nodded once. Then from his inner pocket he pulled a flash drive. Marshall saw it immediately. I saw the recognition flash behind his eyes, the pause, the twitch, the moment he remembered what I had always been good at. Not yelling. Waiting. He stared at the drive. Then at me. Then back again. His mouth pressed into a line I'd seen 100 times before. Tight. Flat. Uncertain whether to explode or play calm. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. Riley moved quietly. The moment he slipped the flash drive into his hand, an automated signal triggered. The contents of the drive, scanned documents, internal emails, agency logs, were already being transmitted.
Clean. Timed.
Irrefutable. The file? Quinn_oversight. PDF. Not a name meant to scare him. But the evidence inside? That was different. The judge noticed the shift. "Is there a problem, Sergeant Creed?" he asked, adjusting his glasses. Marshall cleared his throat. "Just a technical issue." "You're not on the stand anymore," the judge reminded him. "If you've finished your statement, we'll proceed." Riley stood.
Calm. Direct.
"Your Honor, we've just submitted new material to the court's digital docket as well as opposing counsel. We request a 10-minute recess to allow time for review." The judge didn't even look up. "Motion denied. We'll continue." Marshall tried to smile, his usual fake charm. "Of course." But I reached down and tugged at the edge of my shirt, revealing just enough of the matte black watch beneath my sleeve. The green light was steady. He hadn't noticed. But he would. The documents weren't just proof that I had once been accepted into the Federal Cross-Agency Training Initiative. They included a signed internal note, dated over a year ago, the very day I received the anonymous tip. A local officer with prior misconduct, using his sister's credentials to apply under false pretenses. That sibling was me. At the time, I didn't know if it was real or a trap. I flagged it anyway. Quietly. Officially. I wasn't looking for revenge. I just wanted to stop being invisible. But what I found pulled me back in. Marshall had taken more than opportunity. He'd used my background, my security forms, even my clearance language. Word for word. He'd built a reputation from the shadows of my life. Now that shadow had a spotlight. I rotated the bezel again. A quiet click in my earpiece followed. Riley stood once more. "Your Honor," he said, unfolding a page from the folder. "With the court's permission, we'd like to read one paragraph from the submitted document." The judge sighed. "Proceed." Riley's voice was steady. "This letter certifies that Brooke Quinn was accepted into the Federal Cross-Agency Tactical Training Initiative in 2014 under the authorization of the Joint Committee Review Board. Any claims to the contrary are in violation of the Security Access Integrity Act." Marshall shifted in his seat. Riley continued, "Attached are comparative applications submitted under the name Marshall Creed, using identical phrases and copied content from Ms. Quinn's personal statements, flagged across 3 different submissions." Now the room changed. Not suddenly. Slowly. Like the wind turning. Eyes drifted toward Marshall. One of the assistant DAs picked up her tablet and began scrolling furiously. This wasn't retaliation. Marshall snapped his head toward me. "This isn't revenge." "No," I said calmly. "This is a response." "You took my name, my place, my future," I said. Marshall opened his mouth. Too fast. "You don't know what you're talking about." I looked him dead in the eye. "Don't I?" He stood, not formally, not with permission, just that subtle rise men use when trying to seem taller without being obvious. "I worked for everything I have." "No," I replied. "You stole what I stopped fighting for." Riley raised his hand slightly. "Ms. Quinn, please direct your remarks to the bench." The judge didn't stop me.
Not yet.
Marshall gave a forced laugh, flat and tight. "This doesn't change anything." "It already did," I said. The bailiff stepped closer, not reacting to a threat, but to a shift. People feel tone before they understand words, and my tone wasn't defensive anymore. It was deliberate. Marshall slowly sat back down, the fake confidence finally slipping. The leather groaned beneath him like it was tired of supporting his weight. I rose without asking. The court assistant approached quietly, key in hand. She unlocked the cuffs with a soft click. No announcement. No permission needed anymore. I didn't thank her. I walked up to the bench with a calm that wasn't performance. It was memory. It was purpose. In my hand, the folder Riley had handed me. I placed it gently on the judge's bench. "I believe this belongs in your hands now," I said. He raised his eyebrows, mildly surprised that I approached on my own. Back at the defense table, Riley gave the faintest nod. The contents on the flash drive were already secure, already transmitted, already backed up. Nothing could be erased now. Marshall was flipping through his phone like a drowning man grabbing at air, as if there was something on the screen that could undo the last 5 minutes. There wasn't. The folder I gave the judge didn't just contain a certificate or a stolen training application. It held the original. My handwriting. My dates. My digital trail, all stretching back to a month before Marshall ever touched it. But that wasn't all. Attached to it was a notarized affidavit from a federal internal review officer, confirming the tampering and confirming who was responsible. That signature would cut deeper than anything I could say out loud. Riley stood again, with more weight now. "Your Honor, we ask the court to consider these documents in context, not only for Ms. Quinn's defense but to evaluate the origin and integrity of the charges brought against her. These accusations are not only retaliatory, they were built on falsified credentials and family manipulation." Marshall shot up from his seat. "This is fabricated." The judge raised a hand, cutting him off. "You'll have your turn, Sergeant Creed." Marshall didn't sit. "You're taking her word over mine?" "I've served this community for 20 years. Riley replied evenly. "We're not questioning your service, sir. We're presenting evidence that you used access and familial trust to remove someone from a federally approved program without consent and without merit." Marshall finally turned toward me, his face flushed with a different kind of heat now. "You always have to make everything about you," he snapped. I didn't blink. "You made me a ghost in my own life. I'm just reminding everyone I exist." The judge sat quietly with a folder, turning each page slowly. Not skimming. Reading. It was the first time since this entire mess started that someone in authority was holding a document with my name on it, without discarding it. 6 months ago, I sat in a basement office in Norfolk, beneath flickering fluorescent lights that made everything look dead. An alert came through on my secure terminal, civilian complaint flagged as pattern escalation. The officer's name? Marshall Creed. I didn't say a word, not even to Riley. I opened a new file. Label, Creed, Shadow Inquiry. It began with excessive force allegations. Then came suspicious transfers. Internal memos signed without interview. Disciplinary records disappearing. Testimonies buried. By the time Marshall slapped me in that courtroom, I already had everything I needed. But I wasn't chasing a conviction. I was chasing confirmation. I wasn't the crazy sister. I wasn't unstable. I was the one who stayed silent long enough to see everything clearly. The judge finally looked up from the folder. We'll take a short recess to review these materials further. Counsel, remain present. As the judge stood and exited, Riley leaned toward me and whispered, "You good?" I nodded slowly. This wasn't retaliation. He raised an eyebrow. "No," I said. This was containment. Before Marshall could even get to his feet, a second bailiff had already stepped in front of him. Not touching, just blocking the path. And Marshall froze. No words. No moves. Just awareness. The dynamic had changed. For the first time, he was the one being contained. The judge had barely cleared the bench before Riley moved. With a nod to the clerk, he walked over to the AV cart, tapped the screen, and queued up the video file. He didn't need permission. The footage had already been submitted, verified, time-stamped, and approved. The lights in the courtroom dimmed slightly as the video flickered to life on the wall-mounted screen. No drama. No voiceover. Just a grainy, wide-angle security feed, positioned high, likely from a storefront camera. The audio was distant, but intact. There he was. Marshall. Full uniform. Arms squared. Chest puffed with authority. Across from him stood an older black man. Gray hair, a slight limp, a folded newspaper in his hand. No threat. No resistance. The man tried to explain something, voice muffled by the mixed distance. But his hands stayed low. His body language calm. Then Marshall stepped forward. No warning. No hesitation. He shoved the man hard, enough to send him stumbling backward toward the curb. A bystander caught him just before he tipped into the street. A few people in the courtroom gasped. Not loudly, but enough. The kind of gasp that comes when the truth finally lands and starts to stain. The clip ended. Riley stepped back to his seat without a single word. And then something unexpected happened. Another man stood from the far end of the gallery. Uniformed. Older. Steady. Detective Henry Lockcatch, Marshall's longtime partner. I hadn't seen him in years. "I filed the original report," he said, voice low but steady. "It was buried. Rewritten. My version never made it into the system." The room went still again. Marshall didn't turn. But when he finally did, his voice dropped, low and sharp. "What the hell are you doing?" Lockcatch didn't blink. "Telling the truth. Something I should have done a long time ago." The judge leaned forward, folding his hands. "Detective Lockcatch, can you verify this footage?" "I can," Lockcatch said. "I was there, and I was told to let it go." Marshall erupted. "You coward. You wait until now." His voice cracked as he stood, pointing at Lockcatch. "You're going to throw away everything we built because of her?" His fingers stabbed through the air toward me. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. He turned on me fully now. "You think this makes you righteous? You are nothing without me." I leaned toward Riley, calm. Controlled. "This isn't the fall," I whispered. "It's just the stumble." He gave me a quick glance, then looked back at Marshall. "He's unraveling," he said quietly. The judge slammed the gavel once. "Sergeant Creed, control yourself. You are still under oath." Marshall opened his mouth to protest, then thought better of it. He dropped back into his seat like gravity had finally caught him, like everything he'd built no longer had a foundation to stand on. A low murmur moved through the courtroom. Soft, growing. Not confusion.
Clarity.
Eyes flicked between Marshall and me. Then back again. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I didn't search for approval. I just watched. I hadn't come for applause. I came so the truth could walk into the room and hold its own ground. And for the first time all day, it was. The judge called a recess. Officers approached Marshall, not to arrest him yet, but to monitor him.
Carefully. Closely.
His reputation no longer protected him. Not in that room. Not anymore. As he stood to leave, he passed me once more. Slower this time. Quieter. "This isn't over," he hissed under his breath. I met his eyes, my voice like stone.
No.
It's just finally started. Outside the courtroom, the hallway echoed with whispers, heels, and camera shutters. Reporters had begun to gather, but I didn't stop. I didn't speak. I walked right through them. Not fast. Not slow. Just steady. The badge in my hand felt small, but its weight had been earned. Back inside, court resumed before the hour was up. When I returned, the atmosphere had shifted. Marshall's seat was now flanked by 2 federal officers. He wasn't cuffed, but he wasn't going anywhere either. His posture had changed. His face, once smug and confident, had gone pale. Not with fear. With realization. I stepped forward again. No prompting necessary. This time, I wasn't introduced. No gavel struck. I was already being heard. From my bag, I pulled a slim black case. I opened it without flair and turned it toward the bench. The seal read, Central Intelligence Agency, Oversight and Internal Accountability. Below that, an authorization letter, stamped 3 times. "Ms. Quinn," the judge said slowly, "are you prepared to present your findings?" "I didn't come here to win," I said. "I came to reveal." With Riley's help, I handed the judge a series of sealed documents. Each one bore its own classification code, marked for emergency disclosure. Inside those envelopes were 3 warrants, 2 from the Justice Department, 1 from CIA oversight. They detailed names, dates, chains of command, silence complaints, and evidence mishandled or hidden. This was no longer just about Marshall. This was about a system that fed on silence and rewarded those who knew how to smile at the right people.
Marshall didn't speak. Not now.
Not with the agents behind him checking their watches. The judge read through the first file, flipping pages with deliberate care. No rushing. No skimming. The silence stretched, not empty, but dense with consequence. Then 2 people stood up in the gallery. Not attorneys. Not deputies. They were from Washington. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't need to. The room knew exactly who they were. They approached Marshall and handed him a folded document. He didn't even bother opening it. One glance at the header and his shoulders sagged. "You can't," he muttered. But one of the agents was already reading him his rights. He didn't resist. What could he say? He'd built his story airtight. But mine, silent for so long, had weight now. And truth, when backed by evidence, doesn't need to scream. The courtroom didn't erupt. It exhaled. As Marshall was escorted toward the door, 2 more officers rose from the benches. They weren't there to posture. They were there to clean up. A woman seated beside the district attorney raised her phone. The judge raised a hand, and she slowly put it away. I turned toward the gallery, not just the lawyers and officials, but the others. The ones who had watched and stayed silent. Some out of fear, some out of comfort, but all part of it. I spoke clearly, evenly. "The silence you all kept," I said, "wasn't protection. It was participation." Nobody argued. I didn't need validation. I needed recognition. From the back row, Lurin rose. In his hands was a single folded letter. His voice was low, but the entire room leaned forward to hear. "It's from her," he said. "He meant my mother." He unfolded it carefully. "Don't let them rename you," he read aloud. "You already know who you are." My chest tightened. For a second, the courtroom disappeared. This wasn't about court anymore. It wasn't about protocol or clearance levels. It was about history, my history, and all the versions of it I'd buried to keep others comfortable. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them, I saw a space where I used to be invisible, now filled with quiet recognition. The session came to a close. The judge didn't need to call it a verdict. The truth had already been heard. I stepped outside, and the flashes started immediately. Cameras, reporters, microphones pushing close. Miss Quinn, what agency are you with? Did you expect Sergeant Creed to be taken in today? Will this open other investigations? I didn't answer. I didn't owe them anything. Instead, I lifted the badge in my hand, just enough for them to see. Not high, not proudly, just enough. Because sometimes that's all it takes. And somewhere deep inside me, quiet and firm, a voice whispered, sometimes the only justice you get is the kind you make yourself. When the shutters stopped and the crowd thinned, I stayed. The sidewalk outside the courthouse in Richmond was quiet again. Just another gray slab in a city that forgets quickly. People passed, on phones, carrying coffees, walking kids to cars. As if justice hadn't just been whispered inside a room built to silence it. I sat on the courthouse steps, my bag beside me. The wind nudged the edge of my coat. I didn't cry, but the silence pressed differently now. Less like punishment, more like space I had earned. It was over, but nothing was restored. And that's the part no one prepares you for. I reached into my pocket and unfolded the letter again. The creases were soft now, worn from handling. My mother's handwriting had faded slightly. You don't need their permission to exist, it read. You don't need their forgiveness to move forward. Don't wait for their validation. You are already enough. She hadn't signed it. She hadn't written, "Love, Mom."
She didn't need to.
The letter was never about her signature.
It was about mine.
I folded the letter again and slid it back into the envelope. Across the street, a mail truck was idling. It reminded me there was still something I had to do. I stood, walked to my rental car, and slipped inside. The engine hummed to life, but I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need a soundtrack. The quiet was enough. At the first mailbox, I stopped and dropped in an envelope addressed to my Aunt Cheryl. The second was for my cousin Nina. The third, my father. Each letter was handwritten. No copies. No threats. Just the truth, my truth, laid bare in ink. Not to ask for explanation. Not to invite debate. Just to state it. I didn't expect replies. I didn't need them. The fourth letter, I didn't mail. I delivered it by hand. I slipped it under the window of a nursing home in Charlottesville and gently taped it to the glass. Inside, a man I hadn't seen in years sat quietly in his chair. When he saw the name in the corner of the envelope, he didn't wave. But he didn't look away either. And sometimes, acknowledgement is quieter than apology. When the last letter was delivered, I headed home.
It was dusk now.
The sun not yet down, but the streetlights had already blinked on. Shadows familiar to my front step greeted me like old furniture. Inside, everything was just as I left it. The couch still dipped on one side. The air carried the faint smell of mint tea. On the bookshelf, a photo of my mother watched me, taken long before her smile had to be earned. I put the kettle on. No guests. No celebration. Just my breath and the hum of the refrigerator. I sat at the kitchen table, mug between my palms, letting the warmth settle into my hands. People think vindication feels like fireworks. It doesn't. It feels like air returning to a room that's been sealed too long. It doesn't bring restoration. It just brings back you. I took a sip, glanced toward the fridge, and, without meaning to, smiled. Taped to the door with a purple magnet was a crayon drawing. Uneven lines. A stick-figure woman with big hair and a cape. Next to her, a child with pigtails and a speech bubble. "You're my hero," it read in squiggly handwriting. "Don't be afraid, Auntie." There was no return address. But I knew who sent it. And somehow, that was enough. Because justice doesn't always arrive wrapped in headlines or applause. It doesn't always come with doors slammed or people begging for forgiveness. Sometimes, justice is quiet. It's letters mailed. A badge raised, not for approval, but for truth. Sometimes, justice is simply the choice to stop waiting and start speaking. To take the version of your story someone tried to erase and write it again. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of something buried deep, tell us in the comments below. We're listening. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, human-centered stories like this, because some truths deserve to be told out loud.